Hello, everyone. My name is Raymond Johnson, and I want to talk to you today about the DISC index and how you can be true to yourself. So, without further ado, let's go right ahead and jump right into what we're talking about. First of all, we need to know that there are different behavioral styles. And so let's go ahead and look at what your particular behavioral style is, because when we're talking about being true to yourself, we need to know, first of all, who you are, right? And so let's go ahead and look at your behavioral style. And there are two different behavioral styles, right? There is, first of all, what is called the natural, and then there is the adaptive. Now, when we talk about the natural style for behavior, and notice we're not talking about personality, we're talking about behavior, how you behave when you're being natural. The natural style is just that. It's when you're true to yourself. It's what you do when you revert to who is what you do when you revert to a particular behavior under stress, right? And in fact, the more you are in your natural, the less fabricated stress you will have. Now, we all have stress in our lives, but sometimes we can create that stress if we constantly code switch, constantly change, and are not true to who we are, right? But when you are yourself, it reduces most of the stress out of your life. Now, there's the adaptive, which is less natural or less authentic in regards to how what your tendencies are and your preferences. Now, the adaptive causes stress and will cause you to become more or less effective, or not more or less, but less effective the longer you're in your adaptive state. Now, how you can act when you're being observed is how you are when you're in your adaptive. And the goal is to make sure that you're the same no matter what. When you're being watched, when you're not being watched, when you're stressed, when you're not stressed, make sure you're in your natural self. So, what we're talking about is the DISC index and how to be true to yourself. And so the first takeaway is that we want to make sure that we are in our natural selves. Okay. Now we're going to give you an illustration that actually talks about what the natural and the adaptive styles actually look like. So here's what we have. Now, you'll notice on the color bars of a profile, when you take your profile, if you've already taken your profile, you want to pull it out and you want to look at it. But the color bars essentially show you who you are when you're natural, who you are at just being yourself, when you're unobserved, just who you are. Now, the adaptive is the gray bar in each section of the D, I, S, and C. Now, when we look at this, we'll notice that there are some instances where the gray bars, the adaptive portion of the person's behavior that we're looking at, is actually a lot lower. Sometimes it can even be higher than the natural. All that means is it's still adaptive, it's just where you score. And you need to realize that a high bar, high color is not necessarily good, and a low color is not necessarily bad. But let's go ahead and just look at the charts and the bars that we have right here. So we already said that the color bars represent natural behavior, and the gray bars represent adaptive behavior. So we look at the D, the red bar. We see that the score is 99.95. And all that means is that the natural score of this individual is a 99 in the D category, meaning how they make their decisions, how they go ahead and approach problems, right? Now when we look at their adaptive score, which is 95, that's always going to be the second number. We see that they're a 95. All that means is that they pull back a little bit, and you can observe when they're not really being 100% themselves, right? Now, high for the D simply means they're more aggressive. They're more aggressive in solving problems, in getting results, in taking risks, in being a fast paced individual. This is who they are, right? When we look at the I, we'll notice the score is at a 46.25, meaning that in their natural, they're a little bit charming when it comes to their interaction with other people. But when you look at their adaptive, it's a 25. And what that means is that they're a little bit more reserved. Okay. And when we get to the S is a very unique one because it measures cautiousness, right? Not cautiousness, I apologize. It measures stability. And so in stability, in what it measures, it is looking at the pace that an individual sets for themselves. Now, when you notice their score, 2117, the lower S in this particular section simply means they're moving a lot faster. Their pace is not as high, or in other words, not as slow or methodical or intentional as another person. This person is rapidly moving in order to pace themselves in their environment. And you'll notice the 17, which is their adaptive, is a lot lower. What does that mean? It means that they've even adopted to even move faster than what their normal pace would be. Okay. And then lastly, we have our C. This is the cautiousness individual who's all into procedures and who's all into regulations, who's all into making sure that things are done right. What we have here is an 88C, meaning they're very systematic. It's a high bar, but again, high doesn't mean great and good, and low doesn't mean bad. It's just where you are and how you're measured. When we look at their adaptive bar, 28, we see that they are basically rewriting the rules in order to move a lot faster and get things done. So we're talking about being true to yourself. And the best way to be true to yourself is to be who you are naturally at all times. And there's a whole method in order to describe how to do this, right? There's a whole coaching way that we look at in order to reach this particular ideal. But to start us off, we see that the first thing you need to do is you need to make sure that you are yourself. You are who you are at all times. Because when you change, when you're not yourself at all times in all situations, you end up becoming stressed the longer you stay in your adaptive position. Now, let's look at the four components of our DISC, of our behavior, right? And we've got a clue right here at the bottom of the screen, the D, I, S, and C. So let's look at it. All of us have a D, right? All of us have an I. All of us have S inside of us. And all of us have C inside of us as well. We looked at it when we looked at our natural and our adaptive style comparison. All of us have it in us. Some of us have more than others, but we all have it in us. So once again, we have our D that is inside of us, and that measures our decisiveness, how we tend to approach problems and make decisions in areas that are unknown. Persons who are high in D's in their D bar is considered to be a problem-oriented individual. They come with the characteristics of being, how do I say it? Maybe they're task-focused and fast-paced. They're motivated by problem solving. They fear being misunderstood. In fact, this particular person would prefer direct communication and loves a challenge. Now, again, we said it. All of us have a D in us. And maybe what I described in here in this particular description of the D doesn't fit to you. And you say, well, how in the world could I have D in me when none of that fits? Well, we're talking about the high D, the person who is scoring at the top of their chart or near the top of their chart, like in our example of the natural and adaptive style comparison. That is a person who is significantly a task-focused and fast-paced individual. Now, when we look at our eye measures all of our interactiveness. That is how we are people-oriented. Now, this describes how you tend to interact with others and share opinions. It talks about characteristics of persons who are this way, are very people-focused and fast-paced. They're motivated by freedom and possibilities. They fear being boxed in and rejection. And guess what? They also prefer possibilities and solutions, and they do not do well with obstacles because they want to get where it could be, right? And so that's the high I inside of all of us. And again, if this doesn't sound like you, remember, we're talking about the person who's near the top of the scale when they measure. Now let's look at our S, what I love to call the secret weapon of any organization, of any relationship, of any component that deals with people. You need S's in your life. Now, the S measures our stability or our stabilizing efforts. In other words, it looks like how you tend to pace things in your environment. Now, characteristics of people who are high S's include being people focused and intentionally paced, motivated by stability or harmony and interpersonal connections. These are people who are usually very peace loving and peace oriented individuals. They fear conflict and change, which to them represents instability. Now, remember, and I don't know if you've caught on yet, but everything we describe in so far the D, the I, and the S, and we're going to get to the C in a second, it relates to that portion of their behavior. So when we talked about the D and all of its characteristics, it's all about solving problems, getting results, tasks, motivated by problem solving and whatnot. When we talk about the I, it's all about people oriented, right? Being people oriented. And now, no different when we talk about the S, it's all about the pace, the stabilizing. What are the things that impact our pace, our stability, right? And here's the thing, they prefer controlled personal connections, and guess what? Time to make decisions. Time is the greatest ally and the greatest kryptonite against the S in some instances. And then we have our C. Our C represents the part of our behavior which is talking about cautiousness. Now, this person is a procedural oriented individual, and the C measures your preference for established protocols and standards. Now, characteristics of persons who are high C's. Remember, we all have the C in us, but we're talking about people who are high C's. They're very task and detail focused. They're motivated by excellence and details, and they fear failure and even being wrong. Now, again, high C, that's what they're about. However, we all have a C in us somewhere or another. And when you're lower on the C scale, then you relate to these things that I'm mentioning to you in a little bit different. Now, lastly, one more characteristic of a person who's a high C is they prefer factual and practical communication. Okay, so we've just summarized the 4 components of our behavior, but I want to leave you in this particular section of what we're talking about before we get into how you use your talents, is I want to leave you with an analogy. Is that all right? Let's go to an analogy. So an analogy that we can think of is a pilot, a flight attendant, a grounds crew, and an air traffic controller. In other words, the D is very much like a pilot. They know that they've got to get from point A to point B. They've got to get results. They've got to go on and do it speedily, and they want to do it, and they want to do it well, right? But then there's the I. The I is that flight attendant in all of us, where we want to make sure the experience of the trip, the journey, the obstacle, the challenge, the relationship, that there is, everyone has a good experience during the process. Then there's the grounds crew. You heard me mention earlier that they are the secret weapon to this whole DISC thing. Now, here's the thing. The grounds crew is so essential. In other words, the grounds crew, here's what they do. Nobody really knows what they do, but if you think about it, you do. They build the plane, fix the plane, fuel the plane, fix the plane. They stock the plane, they restock the plane, they clean the plane, they fill the plane with passengers, they guide the plane to park, they guide the plane to the runway to take off, they make sure that people have tickets so that they can get on, they make sure the bags are taken care of. Look, the grounds crew is the secret weapon. They're the ones who make sure that everything happens. Without the grounds crew, you will get nowhere. And in fact, with all these different components, if you ignore any one of them, you'll be lopsided. But the grounds crew is a very essential component to any team, right? And so we can't have one team comprised of only one type or two types or even three types of individuals. We need all four types to be our best, to be true to ourselves, to build our teams. And guess what? Where one particular portion is weak, the other one is strong. So that's why we need each other. But look at this, the C. The C is the air traffic controller. Notice that we don't even have a picture of a person in the air traffic controller section. We got a picture of a tower itself, the air traffic control. They're usually all by themselves, focused on the details and where the pilot knows that they need to get to a particular place. And the flight attendant needs to make sure the experience is great. And the ground crews needs to make sure that everything takes place so that it can happen. The air traffic controller knows how it's supposed to happen. And if you listen to your air traffic controllers, you'll always get where you need to be successfully. But guess what? You can't have an air traffic controller without a pilot. You need someone to drive the plane. You can't have a pilot with no flight attendant. You need someone who is going to make sure the experience is where it needs to be, who provides some structure, and who also makes sure that the experience is pleasant. You need a grounds crew. You need all parts. But guess what? Being true to yourself means you also have to work with other individuals. Let's go ahead and look at how we use our talents. Now, this is based on your natural behavioral style. We're in other words, we're focusing on what each of the behavioral types, meaning the D, the I, the S, and the C, are. And so let's look at how we use those particular talents, right? And this is only going to be introductory. It's not going to be conclusive. So without further ado, let's go ahead and move forward. We've got right here the problems. The D inside of all of us, we said it, deals with problems or approaches problems in an aggressive way. They take risks. They make decisions. And they get results. That's their whole focus on everything. So when you have your talents, are you the type of person who throws every bit of all of their training, experience, and knowledge into getting it done in order to get results? Now that sounds good. A lot of people may say, yeah, I'm all about that. But guess what? Everybody's not about results. Some people are more so about the people interaction, the relationship side. Some people are all about pacing their environment, and other people are about the procedures. In other words, the protocols, the procedures, and the standards that need to take place. And so we use our talents based on our strength. There are some people who are so good at what they do that they have great relationships and they're people oriented. That's that yellow eye. They're people oriented and they go ahead and they know how to get it done, and they can usually inspire others to be on their team and to help them get it done. And then there's that pace setter, that magic, that secret weapon that we talked about. They pace things in their environment. And I just want to say, for those who are the pace setters, some people have said that they're very methodical and intentional. They're not as fast as they could be. Well, guess what? That may or may not be true, but guess what? Here's the thing. When you deal with a person who is a high S in their behavioral profile, if they have learned to move with urgency, and they're not as methodical and intentional, but they move with a little bit of urgency, because of the way they think and behave, they will always hit the target and only strike once. Whereas the D may strike 2, 3, 4, 5 times. The D will get you there and maybe tear up the place in the process if they don't have some stronger areas of their behavioral profile in it, like they do the D. But that pace, that S, that high S, they will do it, and they will do it striking once. Now, lastly, we've got our procedural person. They are the ones who make sure that everything happens in the right way. My name is Raymond Johnson. We've talked a little bit, just an introductory, about the DISC index and how to be true to yourself. I hope that this has been helpful. In our next video in this series, we're going to be talking about the strengths and the preferences of each of our four behavioral types. Take care. My name is Raymond Johnson.